levels of this, and there are often 3 levels that are described here. This first part is called earth-like, like it's the foundation. The second one is called gold-like, and that's often said that that's, from that point, we're not going to go backwards. But there are other assertions as well. So, yeah. So if we have those experiences of shamatha and so forth, then they will quickly come back in the next life. I mean, as a baby you probably won't, but then when you develop, you'll find that they'll be there.
So on this chart, going up, we're basically where the painting is. Sorry? Where are we on this plane?
I don't know about you, but I'm sort of
Back number.
So what we don't take from this is that this is the starting blocks. That's not the starting point. I mean, if we're there, I mean, even if we're close to that, we're like light years ahead. I mean, it's really like, because often people look at that and they say, well, I'm nowhere near that, so I haven't even begun. This is just the definable points that we can see clearly. I mean, there's, of course, a lot building up to that. So, as we saw in the Shamatha, I mean, even if we get up to stage 3 or 4, already our attention skills are way better than 99% of the population on the planet, and we are then already having a lot of benefit in our life. And that's sort of somewhere down there. So we can really get a lot from practice and benefit enormous amounts even way before this point. Let's see if there's something else I wanted to add this evening. Oh, just maybe briefly, in the Theravada Buddhist traditions, they also don't use this model. So if any of you have had some experience in Theravada Buddhist traditions like Sri Lankan, Thai, Burmese and so forth, then often the model that they will use is a 4-stage model. And the 4 stages are often referred to as, often in English the first word is stream enterer. I've entered the stream. Once returner, non-returner, and the last one is what's called arhat. Arhat, someone who's achieved nirvana. So often you'll see that 4-stage model in the Theravada tradition. I mean, there is some parallels. I mean, the first stage, the stage of stream enterer, is more or less this stage. Entering the stream is when they've had a direct realization of no self. So it sort of corresponds with that. And then the arhats here, and then the other 2 are sort of in between somewhere. I think that's all I wanted to cover this evening. Any last questions before we wrap up? Yeah.
Going back to the meditation on the self, again about the search. So, is having a mental image something that takes you off path, or is it okay?
Mental image.
A search?
Mental image of a search.
Yeah, like looking at an eye, or like this, I don't know, this comes up.
Well, we're not visualizing. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm not trying to visualize, I'm trying to look.
Right.
And then it seems like, I don't know, I have this image of looking around my mind. I don't know.
Oh, I see. Look around your mind. Well, then you can sort of look. I mean, you can just see: is the mind, is the self, the me that I'm identifying with that? Is that the same? Is the mind? Is that the mind? I mean, we have have an experience of our mind, just the empty mind, is that the same thing? Or what we could do is, if we think it's something in the mind, bring up something in the mind like some sort of image or some sort of memory or whatever, and see, is that it? Is that it? But again, what we find is that, as I mentioned earlier, if we don't really have some more mindfulness through shamatha practice, if our mind is not very clear, then this search is going to be not easy. Because again, it would be like searching for a person in this room if our eyesight was very poor. I mean, it would be like, I can't see very well. So therefore, what would be very helpful again is to do some more shamatha practice to improve our eyesight, to make our mind more clear, so that when we look, we can see more clearly. So that's often the case, is that what I find, of course, and we see that in all Buddhist traditions, that is the sequence. First you have an ethical basis, then you do a lot of shamatha practice, then you start Vipashyana. I mean, all the Buddhist traditions say the same thing. But then when I look around at the different traditions in the modern world, this shamatha seems to largely get ignored. I mean, in a lot of Theravada traditions, they're really talking just Vipassana, Vipassana, Vipassana. In Tibetan Buddhism, you hear a lot about this emptiness, bodhicitta, deity, yoga, or, Glen. But what happened to the shamatha?
How would you do it?
Well, they can't. That's exactly it. But I think what the thing is that for us in the modern world, all these other practices are more interesting. Ooh, I like to do this visualization, these deities and stuff. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Or bodhicitta, or emptiness. Wow. But then, of course, people put a lot of effort into these, and they don't really get anywhere. Because shamatha, that's pretty boring. We're focusing on the breath. Let's do something interesting. And so that's what happens is, and that's what I see, is that often when teachers come, that's what the students, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, I don't know much about Theravada so much though, but in Tibetan Buddhism, if some Tibetan Lama comes, they want all this exotic stuff, because that's what's interesting. But then, of course, it's interesting, but I mean, we can't really do much with it because our mind is completely distracted and dull. So, and I know from my own experience in seeing many people over the years put a lot of effort into these other practices and not really get anywhere much at all. In fact, what happens is they just give up then because they're not making any progress. And that's sad. So, again, I'm not saying that don't do any of that stuff and just do shamatha. I think that's also imbalanced, but we need the package deal. We need a balance. We need the shamatha, we need some vipassana, we need some compassion. We need to have that balance. And then things can progress because each one supports the other, and then we have some basis for these sort of practices. We have a basis for emptiness practice, for bodhicitta and compassion and so forth. So that's important. And then, as I see, is that balance seems to be a little bit lacking in a lot of the traditions in the modern world, how people are trying to practice them, which is, I find, unfortunate.
Well, the search of self was very well structured and logic. I have a feeling of a self which you find either in the body and mind or outside. The second one, the illusory life practice, it didn't seem as much structured in the sense that the way you ran the meditation was like, this is, look at something, is it like that or is it like the other way? And that I kind of, and is it like that? Yes. Is it like the other way? No. I felt like...
But that's the point, is, again, you won't be able to do that practice unless you have an understanding of emptiness. That's why, that's the second half of the practice. So if you have no understanding of emptiness,
understanding in the sense of intellectual.
And in addition, some experience, because then you have strong conviction. So if you have both of those, if you don't have any of that, you have no understanding of emptiness, then that practice would be really a waste of time, because you wouldn't question appearances. You go, of course it's there, look, it's there.
Right.
There's no basis to question it. But if we have that intellectual understanding experience, then we have a basis to question. So then it's very systematic. But if without that, there is no system. You just look and you go, yeah, it's there. Look, of course.
So how do I wonder? Say that I built a quite strong feeling of how it feels like to be empty of the sense of self. How do I transfer that to things that are not me? I mean, maybe it's really like trivial, but maybe it's not. Maybe
Well, we're going to do that tomorrow. We're going to start with the body and then go to the mind. So that's tomorrow's exercise.
I have a kind of practical question.
Practical.
Yeah, science or whatnot has proven that meditation, shamatha meditation, is good for you.
Well, there are some benefits, yeah. I mean, I think the amount of studies they've done is very limited, but certainly there's some studies being done.
I'm not saying they discovered everything about it, as you said, but I'm just saying that it has been proven to be beneficial.
Right, sure.
Which is not very surprising. My question is, and that's before reaching shamatha or even...
That's like doing a couple of, I mean, they've shown very little meditation can have an effect on, positive effect, yeah.
So stage 2 or wherever they get it, 8 weeks, I don't know. So my question is, how, compared to that, how much does a very limited understanding of the Four Noble Truths like that, or, understanding of emptiness or impermanence or compassion, how much does not, understanding emptiness, but... Okay, what I'm asking is, meditation has proven that with not so much effort and understanding, like not such high level of shamatha, you still get benefits.
Some benefit.
So my question is, how does that compare to emptiness? For example, you need to study for 2 years before you see a lot of benefit, or just a little bit, understand?
I mean, some people, and I'm sure there are a number of people in this room, probably have had a spontaneous experience of emptiness with zero study. Zero. And it's benefited, but the problem with that, of course, is that, and it may have benefited them, it may have had a residual effect for days, weeks, or even longer, very positive effect. But the problem is, often, if we've had no study, we go, what was that? Got no idea what it was. It felt good, it had a good effect, but what was it? We've got no idea. So then we're stuck because we've got no idea of how to move forward in a systematic way with respect to that, because we just have got, what was that? I don't know. Maybe it was, I don't know what it was. So we can do, and what we find is, of course, if we do 10 years of study, and that's all we do, we may have zero benefit.
I'm asking about meditation.
So therefore, as we saw here, we need some study, of course, some basis, but then we need to meditate. And if we don't have any sort of shamatha, if our mind is completely distracted or dull, it's probably going to be difficult to even get that, even a little bit. But if we have a little bit of shamatha, and we are following the instructions well, then this can start to happen. And then we'll start to get benefit.
What I'm asking, I guess, is some sort of general time frame. Understand? No, I mean, of course it's individual and it depends on your background and whatnot. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying meditation is proven to help in 8 weeks. I'm saying maybe it can help more, maybe it can help less. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just asking if the same is true, for example, emptiness. Let's say I have done shamatha for half a year and then I do emptiness for another half year. Will I see immediate benefit? Or do I need to get to a much higher level to see that benefit?
No, I mean, again, it's like, I mean, even to have some benefit in Shamatha, we need some basis to be able to benefit.
Yeah, but really small one.
Yeah. No, but I mean, even a basis to start the Shamatha practice. And then with some Shamatha practice a little bit, we can get benefit. Same here. If we have some basis, and the basis, of course, would be some Shamatha, then we can get some benefit. Again, is that, but for this, for emptiness rather, because it's not just focusing on the breath, which is pretty straightforward. I mean, we just improve that. I mean, this is more subtle. So therefore, it's important to receive good instructions, and it's important, or it's very helpful to get some guidance, because this is a little bit more deep, as we've seen here today, than just sitting there focusing on the breath. But of course, even that, if we don't get instructions, instructions on that, what happens, of course, is people get tense, they get headaches, they get agitated, they go, oh, this Shamatha stuff doesn't work, I'm just getting exhausted. Because they didn't get good instruction. So whatever it is, we need to get good instruction. Of course, we could read about it in a book, but better to get it from someone who's qualified, and then you can get feedback. But again, I think that if we really are wanting to put some effort into this, I think we can get some benefit without waiting years, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
I have two questions. The compassion practice, I make a lot of compassion practice with sentences. May you be.
Yeah. Affirmations. Yeah.
It's what tradition is it? It's also.
Well, also here we had, may you be well and happy.
No, but like a lot of sentences, all the time sentences.
Oh.
And I asked a teacher who told me that it's keep you
Focused.
focused.
Yeah, so here what kept us focused, we were doing the breath. So here, when we were doing the Tonglen, what was helping us to focus was the breath. In some traditions, they don't worry about the breath, they don't coordinate it with the breath. They don't do visualization, they just do this affirmation to keep focused.
Which tradition?
I think you find that more. I think you'll find that more in Theravada traditions. I mean, I know a few Theravada practitioners and had a little bit of conversation, and they seem to be using much more of that approach. But I couldn't say as a generalisation. But
Because I feel it with the breath more. Like I feel it more with the breath.
yeah. And so
I need to remember the sentences. It's making.
yeah. But I mean, what I've seen, I haven't had that much exposure to Theravada, but what I have had, it seems like they use much more the sort of that affirmation approach. But again, there's probably a lot of different variations in Theravada traditions, though I'm no expert at all. So I only know a little bit about Tibetan Buddhism, and again, it's often using the breath as the sort of the thing to keep focused when you're doing these practices. That's how it's often presented.
Okay, the second one, the course of MBSR mindfulness, we teach to be aware. So it's a shamatha, or they call it Vipashyana. I don't know. It's to be aware first for the breath. Okay, to concentrate. Very little to concentrate, like one class. And then just to be aware to sensation, to the thought, and to investigate. It's a thought. It's like, what is it? It's a shamatha or Vipashyana?
What we need to realise is how the word mindfulness is used. In Buddhism, we saw that mindfulness is coming from the Sanskrit term smrti and the Pali term sati, and both of those words literally mean memory, to remember. So mindfulness in Buddhism is defined as our faculty of sustaining voluntary attention continuously upon a familiar object without forgetfulness or distraction. So basically mindfulness is simply remembering the object, holding the object. Whereas in modern day mindfulness traditions, I think including MBSR, it's not defined like that.
Yes, it's just to be aware.
Mindfulness, and I've seen John Kabat-Zinn's definition, and it matches, I think probably he I think a lot of other modern traditions have basically jumped on his bandwagon, and he defines it as a non-judgmental awareness of whatever is arising in the present moment. Great. This is not how the word was originally defined. So we need to, then it becomes difficult to say is it this or that, because they're using the word mindfulness differently. So from a Buddhist perspective, that would be applying mindfulness. So Shamatha is about cultivating mindfulness, and then in daily life we apply that mindfulness. And we apply it by being attentive to whatever's there. And so that's an application of mindfulness, which, depending on how we are doing that, it could become Vipashyana. In terms of, are we trying to gain some insights into what's going on in our life or not? Then it's Vipashyana. But of course, Vipashyana just means insight, so we can have many different insights. The insights that we were focusing on here is how things exist. But of course we can gain insights into where is this anger coming from? Why am I angry? That's also insight, but not this type of insight. So that would be a form of Vipashyana, is by investigating.
I understand that it's applying mindfulness.
Yeah.
To investigate small stuff there.
Sure. So that would be applying mindfulness, and so from a Buddhist perspective, that would be more sort of a Vipashyana exercise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Regarding the self-meditation, when I search for it in the body, there is a first, like, is it here? There is the first no. Then should I stay and look after this intuitive first now, or shall I look more?
So I didn't understand. You're looking in the body for me, and then
It seems like it's here.
seems like there.
But so then I look, and then immediately, like, the mind says no, it's not there. But I'm not
Intellectually or through
So
experience?
I think it's intellectually. So
Yeah,
I haven't
well,
really have time to look.
You have to look. Yeah.
So okay.
I mean,
That's
that's what often people go. What happens is when they're doing the search, the intellectual mind goes, "Of course, it's not in the body," and so then they don't really look. They just go, "Yeah, it's not in the body."
So after this, you say, okay, it's not your question. Let me look.
Yeah, exactly. So you just, if the intellectual mind says it's not in the body, don't bother. Just say, take a holiday.
Yeah.
Take a holiday. I'm looking anyway. I'm looking anyway. It's like, again, the example of looking for a person in this room.
No.
And, I've got a picture, and then I don't bother looking over there because my intellectual mind says, well, he wouldn't be over that side. He'd only be here, so I'm not going to bother looking there.
So
Then you're not really going to come to some insight, because then there'll be some doubt.
Because I was not sure, like, okay, good.
Yeah. No, we look, we keep looking.
each part of the body, like the leg.
Well, no, I mean, as long as it's complete, you don't have to, you just, you whatever works for you, and you can start top, up, down, whatever method, just look. And you can just sort of go, whatever works, but you need to look in the whole body. But how you look, of course, I mean, again, if I give the picture, we all have our own method to look. Maybe we sort of do this, or we sort of do this, but we look at the whole place. But the method of looking will be individual, but we need to all look everywhere. That's all.
Can you give an example of something you can find?
Find.
Like when you're looking for the self, let's say that.
So, when we say find, again, we have to be careful what we're saying here. When I say not findable, I'm not saying you can't find a cup on the table. Of course you can find a cup on the table. Of course you can, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, can the thing be found in the basis? So when we say, can we find the cup, we're not saying, can you see a cup on the table? Of course there is. But what we're saying is, can you find the cup here in the
I'm
basis?
not talking about this, I'm talking about this.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just clarifying the word find. What find means. So, when we say the self, find the self, we're saying, can you find the me in the basis? And the basis is the body and the mind.
I understand that.
Right.
I just
And
don't
then,
understand where, like, I'm just asking for an example of something you can find.
well, that's what I'm saying. If we use the word findable in that way, you can never find anything.
Anything.
Nothing. Nothing is findable because nothing exists objectively. Nothing exists from its own side. Nothing exists inherently.
So whatever you give me to find it, I can't find in my mind.
Sorry?
So I can't find anything.
Correct.
No, okay?
But remember, we're looking for something that we think exists. Yeah? For example, we're looking for the cup that seems to be there. We're looking for the me that seems to be here. No?
Yeah.
And if we don't find, that's a realization or an experience of emptiness. And what's that good for? It's a realization that nothing exists independently. And therefore, it would be, if we have that, then you couldn't have any mental afflictions. Because, like, if you look here, where's the flowers here in the basis? If you don't find, that's also the same as there seems to be beauty there. Where's the beauty there? Not to be found. Which means, there's nothing for attachment to grab because there's no beauty there. Which means if we have a pleasant experience, we would fully enjoy the pleasant experience with no craving and attachment. That's the bottom line. We're not doing this just for some stimulation. We're doing it so that we can overcome mental afflictions and suffering.
Yeah, I'm aware.
Yeah. But as long as it's just intellectual, nothing will change. I mean, intellectually, many of us in this room would accept beauty's in the eye of the beholder, maybe. But is that helping us in our life? No, not really. I mean, if we thought about it all the time, it may help a bit. But if we can make that experiential by looking for the beauty, or looking for the flower, or looking for the me, then big transformation in our life. Our mental afflictions really down, suffering down, everything.
The non-findability of things is something quite hard to prove because you have to.
We're not trying to prove it. We're trying to prove it is in direct experience.
Yes, but once you found one single thing that you can find, then we're in a problem, right? I mean, say hypothetically you could find something, okay?
Then everything should be findable.
Yes, but it's not like I'm trying to refute this. What I'm trying to say is that in order, it would be good for us maybe to have a sense of finding something, not necessarily finding a thing in the labels and the bases, right? But what it feels like to, when you search something mentally and have an experience of finding it. For example, if you tell us in Shamatha, find your awareness, okay?
Which we're going to do tomorrow.
Yes, or find your, I don't know, anything, but...
Right.
Find an image of a cup or...
Yeah, but see, this is what I was trying to explain here. That's not how we're using the word find. That's the problem. We have to understand how we're using the word find. We're not saying, can you find a cup on the table?
No, okay, but...
Can you find an image in the mind? Can you find a mental affliction in the mind? Of course we can. Of course. These we can find. But that's not how we're using the word find. Can you find a mental affliction in the basis? Can you find anything in the basis? And the answer, of course, is no. So there's a big difference on how we use the word find. That's what I'm saying. And I think this This is where maybe we're
Okay, maybe, but finding in that sense
in which